Hi, and welcome to Talking Precision Medicine, Data, Drugs, and AI podcast. In this series, we sit down with experts in the application of AI and big data analytics in the drug discovery space. Our guests are innovators, business decision makers, and thought leaders at the intersection of data and therapeutics. We discuss the promise, practice, challenges, and myths of AI in precision medicine. This show is brought to you by Genialis, and Rafael, our CEO, is your host. Genialis is focused on data integration and predictive modeling in precision medicine. We help accelerate the discovery and de-risk the development of novel therapeutics. From heterogeneous data and diverse information stores, we predict with confidence drug targets and biomarkers of tolerance, efficacy, and outcome. Today we speak with Asim Siddiqui. Asim is the CTO at NuMedii, a data-driven drug discovery company. He has deep experience in computational biology, software engineering, next-generation sequencing, and cancer informatics, and is responsible for architecting and applying NuMedii's AIDD, or Artificial Intelligence for Drug Discovery technology. We talk about leveraging public data for discovery, communicating between data scientists, bench scientists, and other stakeholders, and the potential and challenges of using AI to advance drug development. Let's get right into it.
To introduce myself, I'm Rafael Rosengarten. I'm the CEO of Genialis. We work around the space of predictive biomedicine. And we're really interested in meeting with thought leaders in sort of AI for drug discovery as kind of a blanket umbrella term for the space to understand what are the real opportunities, what's all smoke and mirrors, where have you guys made an impact, where do you think there's a lot of work left to be done, and to really kind of have a high-level conversation to help demystify the space a little bit. I'm joined today by Asim. He's the CTO at NuMedii. Maybe you can introduce yourself and your company.
Okay. Yes, thanks for that. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at NuMedii, and NuMedii, our primary goal and purpose is to discover new therapeutics. We think of ourselves primarily as a drug discovery company, and that's our raison d'etre. We see the technology as the platform that we've built is a very useful and powerful tool for us, but our end goal, our product, are the drugs that come out of the technology. In my role as Chief Technology Officer at NuMedii, I'm responsible for developing the algorithms that integrate that data and coming up with the technologies and processes for identifying new therapeutics.
Fantastic, thank you. NuMedii's proprietary technology is called Artificial Intelligence for Drug Discovery, AIDD. Now, without giving away the secret sauce, can you talk a little bit more about this technology, what it entails?
Yeah, so a large part of the problem that we try to tackle is dealing with integrating the diverse data sets that are out there. So there's a lot of data that's been made available in the public domain, but the data is not necessarily in a usable state. And so as an example, if I were to tell you there's an oil field down the road, well, you can't just roll up your car there and pull oil out of the ground, right? There's a process to extract it, refine it to a level that you can fuel your vehicle. And it's the same with our data. The data is all there. It's a very valuable resource, but unless you have the expertise to process that data, analyze it, run it through the appropriate QA processes, it's challenging to work with. So a large part of what we have built at NuMedii is the infrastructure that enables us to integrate those public data sets into a useful form for our purposes. And then we've built algorithms that reside on top of that data and use that data to extract meaning from it.
Now, is this a technology that's used exclusively by NuMedii engineers to support discovery efforts and projects, or is there sort of a user-facing part of this tool as well?
It is all internally facing the technology. We have built a user interface on top of the technology, but that's really for internal use. And it's primarily for communicating with non-expert users. Myself and my team are very comfortable exploring the data programmatically, but in terms of drawing visuals and explaining it to potentially customers that we might bring in or investor groups, it's very useful to have a front end that can help us visualize that data.
That's an excellent point. And maybe something that's not talked about enough is how we as sort of practitioners in the field communicate what we're actually doing. Maybe we can take an aside and talk a little bit more about that. Can you comment on both what you see as a need for sort of layman's communication and also how you and your colleagues at NuMedii approach that?
So I think one of the challenges that we've encountered is that a number of the off-shelf tools and products that have been made by other companies that to visualize big data really don't apply to the sorts of data that we deal with. They're often optimized for different types of data that you might commonly find, geographical tags, other types of information from weblogs and such. And the sort of data that we deal with is very different. And so we have found it necessary to build custom visualization tools to be able to enable us to be able to process and visualize that data.
Interesting. And generally speaking, how does NuMedii's approach, and presumably the approach of some of your colleagues in the field, differ from a traditional drug discovery approach? How have we been doing drug discovery these past eons?
So I think one of the large differences is classically drug discovery has been done in a hypothesis-driven manner, where the specific hypothesis is formulated with respect to biology, and then that leads to discovery of a target, identification of a target, and then from there you move to selecting a molecule against that target. We do take that approach where it fits the problem, but we're also able to do drug development in a hypothesis-free sense, where we will look across the genome and identify a target using the data to draw to the target. It's an important step, though, is to then look at that target in the context of the biology to be able to draw meaning from that, understand whether that target actually makes sense within a larger biological context. And that's really a key important point, that context is really important. If you don't have the context for a particular discovery, the discovery itself is meaningless. If you've identified a particular drug that you think is going to have efficacy in a certain disease, unless you can inform the bench scientists how you think that drug might be working, it's very hard for them to come up with the appropriate model in which to test that hypothesis. So having that context provides you with the ability to make that linkage.
That makes a lot of sense. In a way, what you're saying is that the modeling effort itself generates very high value hypotheses, kind of leapfrogs a lot of the hypothesis testing that happens earlier in basic research or in R&D.
Right. I think what it allows us to do is identify hypotheses that might not be obvious or derive from a logical progression with the data. So you may get a hypothesis that is not obvious, but when you start to evaluate it and look into more details, then it starts to make sense, and you can understand how it's been derived.
One of your founders, Atul Butt, who's a true face to this movement of AI and data science impacting healthcare, he comments very publicly and very vocally about the value of public data. And so I'm interested to know a little bit more about your experience with public data versus, say, proprietary data, how NuMedii attempts to balance its use.
Sure. It's a really great question. I think at the bottom line, obviously, we want to start with the public data. You're not going to start sequencing the human genome from scratch. It's already out there. There's no point in restarting it. So there's a very practical level at which it doesn't make sense. But more than just that obvious case, looking at the public data allows us to construct a map, and it provides what we call a digital map of biology. It allows us to construct kind of the baseline case, and that situation where you have an understanding of the context of the problem that you're trying to approach. We typically start with public data, and as I mentioned earlier, we have a process of curation and QC that we go through as we incorporate it into our models. And what we can sometimes find is that there's a gap between what the proprietary data enables us to do and the data we may want for a specific disease. And so as we look into specific disease and specific indications, we might identify that gap. And in that case, we will try and attempt to fill that gap by sourcing data either in collaboration with a partnership with an academic group, or even generating it ourselves. Mm-hmm. And so I think the public data is where you want to start. You should at the very least catalog and see what's out there. Sure. And because it may be that the answer you're looking for is out there. But I think as you go into specific disease areas, you may well find, and we've found that in certain areas, the specific data we wanted was not available. And so we've taken steps to acquire it.
And are there any particular classes of data you find especially transformative? So obviously you mentioned sequenced genomes, but one of the challenges in biomedicine is the data come in so many shapes, sizes, and flavors.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the data that is really that's very powerful for us is there's really two sides to that question. There's the molecular data, and then there's clinical data, and those two pieces are very critical for us. On the molecular side, we're seeing some advances in the technologies that are available, being able to do finer molecular profiles, things of that nature are very powerful. And then on the clinical side, it's getting access to better clinical cohorts. There are ongoing efforts to incorporate detailed EMR information, and electronic medical records, and information such as that, bringing that to bear. And those sorts of records can really help change the way in which we approach particular problems. And ideally, you want both. You want really great molecular profiles associated with really great clinical data.
In an ideal world.
In an ideal world. You don't get everything most of the time.
It would have seemed to me, and I think this is mostly true, that the molecular data in the public sphere far outweighs the patient data or the clinical data just because of the nature of privacy and how much preclinical stuff goes. What kinds of efforts do you see that might make an impact on making more of the clinical data or this sort of private or sensitive information more freely available? I
think there are a number of efforts that are underway to try and figure out how to do that. There's been projects like the Million Genome Project, there's the UK Biobank. These are efforts that are trying to accumulate those large data sets and do so in a manner that enables access to researchers while at the same time maintaining privacy for individuals. And I think advancing those types of efforts is going to go a long way to do that. There have also been some private efforts that are trying to accumulate cohorts of data and having the patients somehow reap some benefit from depositing their data into those repositories. And I think it remains to be seen how successful those approaches are going to be. But I think it's one of those areas where I think the fears are maybe a lot higher than the potential value. And I think, for example, in the oncology area, patients are often willing to give their data into some public effort if they know it will help other cancer patients in the future, even if they know that they themselves won't derive any benefit from them. And so I think at some level it might be that if people understand how the disease is going to be used and they can see the value that it will provide to future generations, I think they're more willing to accept placing that data into a more publicly accessible manner.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think the incentive structure is an interesting topic. You see the rise of companies like Luna DNA, for example, which is a really interesting and I think potentially disruptive model. But my guess is that people will find greater incentive in altruism than they will in some small token or Bitcoin or whatever it is for the trouble of submitting their data. But I guess we'll see.
Yeah, it remains to be seen.
Let's switch gears a little bit. I'd like to hear a bit more about NuMedii. Can you maybe highlight one of your success stories? This will probably be something you guys have either published or touted already, but for our audience, where do you feel like you guys have really kind of taken on a problem and hit pay dirt?
Sure. So one of the recent areas we've been working in is idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, IPF. So this is a disease, fibrotic disease, called the scarring in the lungs. Eventually leads to the lungs becoming very stiff and very hard for the patients to breathe. It's kind of a very awful way awful disease in terms of the effects it has on the patients. And this is an area where we decided to apply our technology and see if we could uncover potentially some new therapeutics. And so we're able to identify a particular data set. We're using in this project both data sets that are currently in the public domain as well as some data sets that we've acquired access to in advance of them being available in the public domain. We're using those data sets to make our discoveries. And in those cases, we've actually identified computationally some novel drugs and novel targets which have shown efficacy in vitro testing. And so we're now about to start a stage of in vivo testing in those targets, and we plan to take those forward. So that's a very recent success that we've had here at NuMedii.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I saw Jeannie, your CEO, discussing that you're actually kind of becoming a biotech in a sense. So actually doing the lab work. What's that transition like internally? So, my perception is you were truly a data shop, and now there's kind of this pharma arm to it. How is that going?
I mean, I would debate that perception somewhat, because I think, from my perspective, we've always been a drug discovery company. From the time I joined the company, we've always thought about ourselves primarily as a drug discovery company. As I mentioned at the start, our goal is to discover drugs, and the technology is more of a means to an end. It's the way in which we discover drugs. But really, the value for us is in those drugs. And we've worked through partnership with pharma companies and others to help us advance that discovery process. But it's I don't really see it as a transition more than just it's becoming more of an emphasis now within the company because of where we are with our products and our portfolio. And it's exciting. I think at the end of the day, what it all comes down to is how good are you in the clinic, and are you moving the needle in the clinic? Because if you're not moving the needle in the clinic, it doesn't matter how good your algorithms are or what they produce. Really, that's where the rubber hits the road. And so I think having clinical proof is really going to be a big step for us in the advance of our company.
I saw 2 press releases from you guys just this week. One is announcing a new VP of research. Presumably she's going to head up some of this effort?
Yes, that's Heather Arnett. We recently joined us, and she's heading up the drug development efforts within NuMedii, and that's really becoming more of a focus within the company for now, absolutely.
And then the other PR, if I'm not mistaken, was about a new partnership. Let's talk about partnerships for a second. What kind of appetite do you find is there in the industry or among academic collaborators to work on these programs together?
That's right. Actually, the one that you're referring to is the one with Jay Pastrika on the pancreatitis.
That's right. At Johns Hopkins, yes.
That's right. So yes, we've started a collaboration with them on pancreatitis, and I think they're generally very excited by the ability for potentially a new technology to help identify therapeutics for their patients. In an academic group, it's something, if we can help identify new drugs and those drugs advance therapies for patients, that's a big win for everyone. And the same goes for commercial entities as well. I mean, they're interested in advancing their drugs. Pharma companies, often large pharma companies, the drug discovery AI is an area that they're dabbling in, but it's not an area where they necessarily have a lot of internal expertise, or they may have internal experts who are bioinformaticians, but they're focused on other types of projects. And so working with us is a way for them to check out the technology and understand how and where it can provide help with them without them making a large internal commitment to those efforts.
I'd like to talk about your development a little bit. So you mentioned bioinformaticians at pharma companies. You've got quite an impressive CV. It includes stints at Life Technologies, Natera, private consultancy. Talk a little bit about your development and how your skill set has evolved with the science and with the changing times.
For me, the biggest changes that have occurred during my career is the availability of data and the availability of compute power. I originally started off as a physicist, and my undergraduate degree was in physics before transitioning into biology, and then it was really called more computational biology. I mean, bioinformatics was kind of a new buzzword around the time I was doing my PhD, and I'd always had an interest in biology, and so it was a fascinating field for me to enter because it allowed me to combine my love and interest of biology with mathematics. So prior to that, biology, at least had not really been viewed at that point as really a mathematical field. Of course, now you can't get into biology without like having, I think the future is really going to be run by folks who are developing algorithms to analyze and understand biological systems. But back in the day, there was less math in biology. So for me, it was fascinating to find that there's areas of biology that were tractable by and exciting from a computational perspective. And so I think even back then, one of the frustrations I had was the amounts of data I had access to me. And there were experiments that I was trying to run that just weren't, as a naive graduate student, which were just not computationally feasible. And I would quickly run into cases where I couldn't run the algorithm I wanted to because it was just not computable in a reasonable amount of time. And I think what's been most amazing to me is over the last 20 to 25 years has been that development and the availability now of compute power. I mean, if I want a new server, I just spin one up on AWS and at a click of a switch, a click of a button. It's so trivial to get additional computing power. And so that's been amazing. And then with the advances in next-gen sequencing and other technologies in biology, we now have quantities of data which were just unimaginable back in the day. I mean, when I was working on protein structure, we had maybe 1,000 structures in PDB. I mean, it's something on that order, and it's a lot larger now. I think those are the real changes that I've seen over my career, and I've gone back and forth a little bit between academia, industry, computer science, and software engineering, and more biology-focused areas as things are perceived and as things have changed in the field. After my PhD, I actually spent a number of years back in the software industry, primarily because I was disenchanted perhaps by the lack of data, but that was available at that point. But with the sequencing of the human genome, that's when I decided to re-enter biology, because I saw that as an advance that would make a lot more data available, and it's been a really exciting ride. After that time, I've really stuck in biology, and it's been a really exciting ride with the advent of new data and new data types being brought out.
Yeah, I recall Larry Smarr, the former astrophysicist from UCSD, who said he entered biology because he wanted a real big data problem.
Right. Yeah.
So I wanted to move in a more general direction and discuss kind of some industry trends and how you think about it. But maybe one place to start is to discuss this kind of continuum of terminology. There's drug discovery, and there's precision medicine, and there's diagnostics. And, kind of from the math side of things or the modeling side, these all seem part and parcel, but maybe we can kind of clarify how we think about it.
Sure. So, I mean, I think the healthcare field as a whole has, as you mentioned, has a number of distinct pockets, and the technologies that might be applied to that may be very similar, but the development of those fields and the application of that technology in those areas is going to be very different. And it's different, I think, from both a timeline perspective as well as regulatory perspectives. And so when you think of applying these sorts of technologies in diagnostics, a very different field to applying them to drug development. In diagnostics, the regulatory paths are often a lot more straightforward or faster than they are in drug development. I think many advances in AI to date have been in the area of image analysis, where you may have a imaging slide, or some type of imaging method that would be analyzed by a radiologist or some other practitioner. And those sorts of analyses that we're seeing them potentially be augmented and advanced through the use of AI technologies, deep learning technologies, applying them to image analysis to potentially identify features of medical interest, and those technologies are now getting to the point where they can, I think, in some cases, can meet and even exceed human practitioners. And in the diagnostic field, I think there's a very rapid path to bringing those technologies into practice. In drug development, we're seeing those technologies bringing to bear various different parts of the pipeline. The drug development pipeline as a whole consists of many different areas, and so you're seeing companies that are tackling the use of the identification of novel structures to bind particular targets that are of interest. At NuMedii, where that isn't related to at all what we're doing, but we're using our technologies to identify potentially new targets or relating drugs directly to particular therapeutic areas. There are also technologies out there that people are developing to identify sites that might have faster accrual of patients for clinical trials. And so there's a huge spectrum across the entire drug development pipeline where you can apply these sorts of technologies. and their application and the rapidity with which that application will be brought into practice is going to depend on that particular area and the regulations governing that. But I think there's a huge potential here for these types of technologies to really advance and help us speed up drug development.
Undoubtedly, there's a lot of hype around the field as well. I mean, there's a huge amount of, we'll call it promise, but then people also like to use a lot of buzzwords to kind of describe their activities. One of my favorite jokes is, we do linear regression for drug discovery, which only makes some people chuckle. But
yes.
I'm curious to know what you think. Where you think that the technology community has so far failed to live up to the promise, but then maybe the flip side of that is, what are some of the proofs that show that what we're doing actually can and will make a difference? What have been just a couple examples of real wins?
Sure. I mean, I think there's some well-publicized failures. Probably the biggest one that sort of comes to mind is IBM Watson. I mean, that was really touted as a platform that was going to be able to advance the way doctors thought about and integrated new information, and it's had real challenges, and those have been published in a number of articles, and so I don't think we need to belabor that point. But it's there are, I think, areas such as that where I think where technology companies often fail is if they think simply by bringing a technology into biology that they will be able to solve the problem, and that is all going to be it's all going to be plain sailing and great. These problems have not been solved because they are challenging, and underestimating biology, if you're a newcomer to biology, underestimating biology is the worst thing you can do. Biology is 10 times, 100 times more complex than you'll ever imagine. Anytime you think you have a handle on something, we discover a new molecule, a new process. 10 years ago, it was microRNAs was suddenly on the scene, and no one even thought about microRNAs. Then it was link RNAs, and so there's new types of processes that we're biological processes that we're discovering. So we don't understand the entire system, and so that complexity in biology can often lend an outsider to think, well, there's enough data here, we can make sense of it. And I think those challenges, I think, are best addressed by ensuring that you have a human in the process to oversee and manage results. I think we're a long way from having a completely automated process for some of the more difficult questions within biology. I think, as we mentioned at the start, our technology, we use it as a way of highlighting new hypotheses that are potentially novel. But at the end of the day, we have a human look at those and think about, okay, do these new hypotheses make sense in the context of what we already know about biology? Is this a reasonable hypothesis? And do I have a way to test this in an animal model or in vitro model? And I think those sorts of having that human in the loop is a really key step in our process. And I think getting to a fully automated solution is going to be challenging. On the flip side, as I mentioned earlier, areas such as image processing identification, a lot easier in that sense to have a very well-defined set of images that you can train on, and it's a much simpler question, you can to get training data on. So you can have these sets of images is very large. You can easily pass them to a set of radiologists. You can have them look at you can have a panel of 5 or so radiologists score all these images, and then you have a training set that you can train over. And the variation within those images is relatively small if you're looking at a particular problem. And so it's a very well-defined problem space. And so those sorts of areas are much more amenable to a automated machine learning approach, because the problem, you immediately narrow down the problem space versus trying to tackle the type of problem that IBM Watson was trying to tackle, where you're saying, okay, look, read and learn the entire body of medical knowledge and now recommend the best drug or best treatment for this patient. That is a much harder problem. And I think in order to be successful, tech companies or AI-based drug discovery companies need to carefully dissect the problem to something that's going to be tractable and answerable, because otherwise you can really easily go down a rabbit hole, and there's just, I don't think there's really enough data available, although you joked earlier about there being biology is a big data problem, but we don't actually have enough data yet to answer certain things in an automated fashion. And so we need to use human smarts to augment the computational algorithms so that we don't go down rabbit holes and dead ends.
The human as a biological system is sort of mind-bogglingly complex. So there's the history of biological knowledge, and then there's just each one of us.
Right. Yes, exactly. Yeah, and we're all and each of us is an individual with their own set of SNPs and epigenetics, and so then yes, there's a whole. I said earlier, there's layers and layers of complexity, and just when you think you ever understand everything, there's another layer of complexity to add in.
I'd like to finish up with maybe the counterexample. You gave a really great success story from NuMedii's past or current, I guess. Can you talk a little bit about maybe one area where you thought you had a problem nailed and you missed it?
I would say, I sort of alluded to this earlier, and I think it's as a naive graduate student, when I was working away on a particular problem, I was trying to build a molecular model of a particular system, and very quickly encountered issues that were just impossible at the time. And I think that really taught me. It's really echoing the same statements I was making earlier. It taught me the importance of specifying a problem ahead of time, delineating, understand what's going to be achievable and what's not, and what's practical and what's not. Because in that problem, I was essentially trying to solve a molecular problem that was beyond the capability of the computing power I had available to me at that time. And understanding what is practical is really important. And to a large degree, the computational resource problem has been solved at some level with resource such as OWS, but you still need to think very carefully about the questions that you ask, because you can waste a lot of your time and a lot of compute resources answering questions that are not going to provide useful or interesting insights. And so I think a key learning for me from some of those earlier experiments was understanding the importance of carefully constructing the right question to ask and ensuring that you have the right data to answer that question.
Maybe we'll wrap up there. It's a big compute, big data. It's a great time to be in this industry for sure.
It's a lot of fun. We're all having a lot of fun, and hopefully we'll help advance the field along the way.
Asim Siddiqui, thank you very much for your time today. I appreciate it, and I look forward to bumping into you at the next conference.
Great, thanks. Great talking with you.
Take care.
This was the first episode of Talking Precision Medicine, Data, Drugs, and AI. Please share it with your colleagues, leave a comment or a review, and stay tuned for the next one. Thanks for joining the conversation.